Where have you been? Why didn't you show up for my wedding rehearsal? Mom tried to call you 6 times. She's really mad at you. Where's your mom? She just left to take my dad to his motel. I didn't miss how S's eyes darted away from me when she said that. I continued. Welcome to the Cheating Secrets channel, Dave. Where have you been? Why didn't you show up for my wedding rehearsal? Mom tried to call you 6 times. She's really mad at you. Where's your mother? She just left to take my father to his motel. I didn't miss how S's eyes darted away from me when she said that. I continued. What I was doing before my stepdaughter arrived, which was taking my certificate of appreciation off the hallway wall. What are you doing, Dave? Mom cleaned all these frames about 6 weeks ago. I barely paid attention to her and took the frame certificate to the kitchen. Sandy followed me and watched as I wrapped it in bubble wrap before packing it into an already loaded box. She turned around, the skirt of her dress swirling around her for a moment. This sight took me back to one of the hundreds of dance recitals I went to as a kid. Only now, she wasn't dancing for Daddy, but hurrying back to the living room. I followed her, carrying the packed box. Sai's mouth opened and closed like a goldfish. I could see. She turned around and swirled her skirt around her for a moment. This sight took me back to one of the hundreds of dance recitals I went to as a kid. But this time, she wasn't dancing for Daddy. She was hurrying back to the living room. I followed her, carrying the packed box. Sai's mouth opened and closed like a goldfish. I could see that she had just noticed that all the wall decorations, which were exclusively mine, had disappeared from the walls, along with my souvenirs from the shelves. If she checked all my clothes from the wardrobe and tools from the garage, I went out the front door and was packing the box into the back seat of my car when I felt Sandy follow me in and stand watching. She came in, and I could see she was shocked. She said in a quiet voice, her voice shaking, "Are you leaving us? You finally noticed. I've been moving my things out for 4 days, but neither your mom nor you noticed. Shouldn't that tell you something?" "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry, Dave. I've been a little preoccupied." She spoke quietly, her voice shaking with shock. She'd never even thought about this happening. "Are you leaving us?" "Yes, you finally noticed. I've been moving my things out for 4 days, but neither your mom nor you noticed. Should that tell you something?" "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry, Dave. I've been a little preoccupied with the wedding." "You'll come, won't you?" "No, I won't. I thought my absence from the rehearsal tonight would tell you that, but why?" "Dad, oh. I'm Dad again. How wonderful, isn't it? You stopped calling me that 3 weeks ago, remember?" Sandy flinched, wrapping her arms around herself, and my old instincts kicked in. "You'd better go back inside. It's cold out here. I'll call Mom first. You can try, but I bet her phone's off." I went back into the house to the living room and plopped down on the couch. I heard Sandy talking on the phone, clearly leaving a voicemail for Mom to call her ASAP. Then, she popped into one of the comfy chairs, which seemed to swallow her whole. I waited for her to collect herself and start. I guess she didn't know where to begin. Finally, I asked, "Why won't you come to my wedding?" She looked confused. I could see that the extreme selfishness common to many brides had completely blinded my stepdaughter. I was sad. I hadn't thought she was capable of such self-centeredness. I shook myself mentally. I was in a hurry to move on. I didn't have time for this, so I took charge of the conversation. "Sandy, I've loved you since I first met you. When you were a chubby 2-year-old, I took a moment to center myself. I was eager to move on, so I took charge of the conversation. Sandy, I've loved you since we first met. You were a chubby 2-year-old with perpetually dirty fingers. I still love you, and depending on how things go, I may very well love you forever." I paused to determine the best way to continue, then decided to follow the format I used in the letter in my pocket. I informed Sandy and her mother that I was leaving them when I met your mom. She had just been She had just been abandoned by your birth father, as we've told you before. He was a drunk, and after your mom caught him with another woman for the second time, she threatened to leave him if he didn't change. Instead, he got up and left you both. He abandoned you. I let Sandy take a moment to respond, but she just stared at me. I'll tell you again, your dad left us when you were very young. He was an alcoholic, and after your mom caught him with another woman for the second time, she said she'd leave him if he didn't change, so he left, and he left you both. I paused for a second to let Sandy say something, but she just stared at me. Then your mom lost the house because she couldn't pay the rent. We met, fell in love, got married, and moved into this house with my two sons, Mike and Richard. Since our old house was gone, I needed to help you anyway. I'm getting off topic, but I loved your mom and loved you. I loved you as if you were my own daughter. I loved my kids the same way. I was always ready to raise you. I thought I had lost all that a month ago. Sandy must have heard the tremor in my voice during that last sentence. It brought her back from wherever she'd been. You were Dad, you were the best father a girl could have. Many of my friends. I was so proud when you asked me to walk you down the aisle. I paused again to see how she'd react, and I could tell that she was starting to understand what I was saying. Sandy, you never said you wouldn't walk me down the aisle, did you? I thought I'd lost that, but then everyone was really impressed with me. They couldn't believe it when I told them you were just my stepfather. She stopped, covering her mouth with her hand, slightly shaken by her own words. She realized in about 2 seconds what had happened to me over the past month. I continued my story. I liked the guy you chose as your life partner, and he was the I was super proud when you asked me to walk you down the aisle. I paused again to see how she'd react. I could see that when it finally hit her, she looked away again. Yes, Sandy, you never said no to walking you down the aisle. But then your biological dad came back into the picture, and bam. I'm out. He's all yours in your and your mom's minds and conversations. I'm yesterday's hero. Did you know that she was so inattentive that she didn't even realize I never bought the suit for tomorrow, as she asked me to? I watched again as Sandy tried to decide which of my birth father came back into the picture, and suddenly I was Alf's all yours in your and your mom's minds and conversations. I'm yesterday's hero. Did you know that she was so inattentive that she didn't even realize I never bought the suit for tomorrow, as she asked me to? I watched again as Sandy tried to decide which of the issues I raised to address first. I saw the look of horror on her face when she realized she had forgotten that she had asked me, the only father she had known until last month, to walk her on her most important day. I was sure I would hear an apology for this, and that it would prompt her objections. I was wrong. Instead, she confirmed. She was trying to justify her forgetfulness by being superficial. Yes, Dave, you met my biological father. He means more to me than my life. You have to understand that he came back into my life just last month when he found out I was getting married, and it was so wonderful. He's flashy and spoils me by buying me everything I look at twice as nice. He's just... well, I guess I can't say much. Mom too, I guess. I just assumed he'd walk me down the aisle. Sorry, I forgot that I had already asked you. It's just been like a whirlwind since he came back, which swept you off your feet, didn't it? Yes, that's exactly what he did. Admit it. He just oozes charisma. I was telling Mom recently that she stopped when she realized what she was about to say and to whom she was about to say it. Her face was always like a shallow pond where even the lightest breeze ruffled the surface, and soon replaced by a new gust of wind. Now was no exception. Emotion after emotion flickered across her face as I realized how she had totally ignored me the last month. I watched her process it, and I think I saw the exact moment she realized her mom had been just as bad. All I had heard in my own house for the last month was John did this or John said that. I tried to show them how angry I was about all of it, but nothing worked. She'd been ignoring me for the past month. I watched as she processed this. I even think I saw the exact moment when she realized her mother had been just as bad. All I'd heard in my own house for the previous month was John did this or John said that. I tried to show them how angry I was about all of it, but none of it was noticed. They were too far under John's spell. Yes, I saw his charisma, too. I could understand why he was such a good salesman. What I didn't do, unlike my wife and stepdaughter, was fall under his influence. They were completely blind when I pointed out his broken promises 3 times. The last straw was 4 days ago when I found I realized they were too far under Jink's spell. I saw his charisma too, and I could understand why he was such a good salesman. Unlike my wife and stepdaughter, I didn't fall under his influence. They were completely blind when I pointed out his broken promises 3 times. The last straw was 4 days ago when I found out I wouldn't be walking Sandy down the aisle. I found out when I overheard them talking about who would be where in the church. My name wasn't even mentioned. Instead of deciding to show up and hope there was a place for me in the front pew, I started packing my things. I thought I would gently start to prepare Sandy, so that future revelations wouldn't shock her. You do realize he's still a lying cheat, don't you? You know he's the same scumbag who abandoned you and your mom 20 years ago, right? He left you both back then, and as soon as he gets what he wants this time, he'll leave you again. Oh, don't be so bitter, Dad. Dave, yes, I'm sorry. Sandy, you know he's a cheater. You know he abandoned you and your mom 20 years ago. He'll do it again. I'm sorry. I forgot to tell you that my biological father would be walking me down the aisle. It's my fault, not his. You can be mad at him and call him nasty names. What proof do you have that he's still a womanizer? I thought about my answer again. I feared what the response to my next question would be. I knew my 20-year marriage was dead. Had I also lost my daughter? Well, in for a penny, in for a pound, as they used to say. Where is your mom? I didn't have to hold my breath for long. Sai's eyes left mine for a long pause, then they continued to dart back and forth as she asked herself how deep my question went. Had I intentionally linked my question about why I thought her biological father was still a cheat with where her mother was? Without a doubt, Sandy knew the execution was left. Whether we end our 20, we've been together for a year, and it's been a lot of lies. But we've also got some good memories. I've got to tell you something. This morning, I found protection in your mom's purse. I'm sure you know that I had a vasectomy before I met her, so it wasn't for me. I know you take. I've got to tell you something. This morning, I found protection in your mom's purse. I had a vasectomy before I met her, so they weren't for me. I know you take birth control pills, so they weren't for you. The package was unopened, so she probably hasn't slept with him yet. But buying a whole pack 24 hours before his arrival indicates intent, doesn't it? I can see by your face that this news doesn't surprise you. I can only conclude that you're complicit in. I'm glad to say the birth control pills weren't for you. The package was unopened, so she probably hasn't slept with him yet, but buying a whole pack 24 hours before his arrival indicates intent, doesn't it? I can see by your face that this news doesn't surprise you, so I can only conclude that you're complicit in your mother betraying me and our wedding vows by falling into bed with that slippery little bastard. Do you think it's romantic that, like in a fairy tale, your mom and dad are getting back together and you can play happy families? Start married life with a Porsche in the driveway instead of the Nissan I bought? You, Sandy, opened your mouth to respond, but I raised my hand and said, don't bother. The answer doesn't matter. I knew you knew, but you kept quiet and didn't tell me. That ends our relationship right here and now. I stood up, walked over to her, lifted her up, and hugged her, suppressing all the. I hadn't yet expressed all the emotions I had that day and month. I said my final words to her, I loved you. Then I left her life. Looking back from the door, I saw utter devastation on her beautiful face as she watched me leave. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Swallowing and gasping, she desperately tried to find her phone. I assumed this. I was hoping her mom hadn't turned away from her, that her mom hadn't yet cheated, and that her mom could use this as a reason to convince me to forgive her. Also, I was hoping Sandy wouldn't lose her other dad, the dad who had been crying out for the past month that his wife He'd been crying for months that his wife wasn't loving him anymore, but no one listened. Meanwhile, she fell for the smooth-talking salesman with his sweet story. I shrugged. Whether my wife had physically crossed the line or not, the protection I stumbled upon that morning was enough for me. Initially, I had planned to move out temporarily too. I didn't care if my wife had physically crossed the line or not. The protection I stumbled upon that morning was enough for me. I had planned to move out temporarily to demonstrate the extent of my dissatisfaction with the events of the past month. The morning's discovery told me I had underestimated how bad things were, and after several painful hours, I agreed that moving out was necessary. I checked my conscience, and it agreed with me. I jumped in the car and drove away. Epilogue: some of what follows is fact and some are rumors. The story wouldn't be complete without both. On the day of the rehearsal, I spent some time trying to find out which motel the father, who had just reappeared, was staying at. I was motivated by a desire to witness my wife's infidelity firsthand to harden my heart for what needed to be. But I couldn't find it. So, I decided to go with Plan B. After I left Sandy, I parked on the road near my house and turned off the lights. And sure enough, less than a minute later, my ex-daughter drove past in tears. A herd of elephants could have followed her unnoticed. She drove straight to a specific motel and rushed directly. My efforts were a bust. I decided on Plan B. After leaving Sandy, I parked on the road near my house and turned off the lights. Sure enough, less than a minute later, my ex-daughter drove past in tears. A herd of elephants could have followed her unnoticed. She drove straight to a specific motel and rushed directly to a specific room. I followed her closely with my trusty old SLR camera and zoom lens. Due to S's cries, her mother opened the door. I was mentally prepared, at least I thought I was, for the scene that greeted me. Strangely, what bothered me wasn't the sight of Laura hastily wrapped in a motel robe with tousled hair or her ex. I followed her into the room, my trusty old SLR camera and zoom lens at the ready. When the door opened, her mother came in. I was mentally prepared, or at least I thought I was, for the scene that greeted me. What bothered me wasn't the sight of Laura, hastily wrapped in a motel robe with tousled hair, or her ex-husband standing behind her in boxers. It was the look of panic on her face when Sandy spoke. I had protected her from such emotions for 20 years. It's a habit. I threw the camera onto the passenger seat, turned off my phone, and drove off into the night. After Sandy was led into the room and the door closed, I got the scoop on what happened from various sources. The wedding did take place the next day, but at 6:00 p.m. instead of the scheduled 10:00 a.m. First, they had to find the bride's mother. She spent the night desperately searching for me and fell asleep exhausted. Then, they spent precious time looking for the bride's biological father, but he had disappeared. As I told Sandy, once he got what he wanted, he left. I really wondered about his motivation for all of this. I did some digging, and it turns out he and his second wife never had kids. Maybe he just wanted to experience walking his child down the aisle. Some folks just like collecting life experiences, I guess. He probably saw that Laura was still a catch and wanted her, or maybe it was just an egotistical trip. He was a self-centered person, so he just turned on the charm and pursued her until she gave in, just as he had warned her he would when things got serious. He left, and it might have been the most expensive sex of his life. He even sent several photos to his wife's mailbox. She left him using their prenuptial agreement. In the end, she continued to run her father's company without him. There were rumors that a week or so later, he was found badly beaten in some alley. It was said that his father, his in-law, always took care of his only daughter and never liked scum. By the time the wedding party realized he was gone, the vicar had kindly rescheduled the ceremony to 6:00 p.m. I'll never know when Laura found out that all the seams on the dress she was planning to wear to the event had been torn. It would have fallen apart in her hands, just like our marriage did because of her actions. I ignored all the calls and texts from Laura and Sandy. They flooded my voicemail with, "Please come back," but there was no way they could change the past. As expected, Laura left a long message saying she said she had just gone into John's motel room after dropping him off and they just talked. The protection in her purse was a novelty. At the front desk, 2 photos emailed to me clearly showed this was a lie. In the first, she stood in the motel doorway exposing her left breast in a hastily tied robe. The second was an enlarged shot of the same photograph highlighting what was almost certainly a half. I just got to John's motel room after dropping him off, and they were just chatting. The protection in her purse was just a novelty. At the front desk, 2 photos emailed to me clearly showed this was a lie. In the first, she stood in the motel doorway, exposing her left breast in a hastily tied robe. The second was an enlarged shot of the same photograph, highlighting what was almost certainly a half-dried seed covering the hair on her bangs. A simple, sorry, prompted me to ask her, for the sake of preserving our memories, not to contact me again. She mostly respected this, and now just occasionally sends me well wishes. Family gossip tells me she has had a hard time moving on and is still not seeing anyone. I made a minimal offer for the divorce, and she gladly accepted it. I stayed at my younger son's house for a while, with my car hidden in his garage. He and my older son also they didn't answer their stepmother's calls. They saw how much I was hurting. S's new fiancé found me, and I agreed to talk because I liked him. He convinced me that Sandy had tried to stop her mother from meeting him, but John's spell was too strong. We still talk occasionally. Apparently, the relationship between mother and daughter remains strained. I'll never know if Sandy blames Laura for losing both her fathers or if her new husband keeps his mother-in-law out of their home. I'll probably forgive her one day. My sons have already forgiven her. Her and S's husband begs me to. If the pain weren't still so fresh, I might have been devastated by the story of Sandy walking alone down the church aisle while her mother, already seated on a pew, watched, exhausted, with tears still smudging her makeup. The groom couldn't remember if there were 1 or 2 empty seats next to her in the front pew. In any case, my interest was purely academic. Between the planned and actual weddings, he significantly Sai's actions and thoughts regarding her mother's mistake were influenced. In the end, he figured it would work in his favor if the bride who saw the consequences of infidelity remembered it well and focused all her energy on bringing everyone back for the rescheduled ceremony. But rumors spread, and it was clear that Laura lasted less than half an hour at the reception desk. She was getting accusing glances from both sides, and it hurt her feelings. Today, I still wonder if she regretted losing me and completely ruining her daughters. It was a big day, and I was thinking about how I felt. I had been sad for several months after my breakup, but I was also afraid that I would never trust a woman again. The thing is, she was the widowed mother of Richard's wife. I met her when she arrived early to plan her daughter's wedding. That was 12 months after my breakup. I felt like I connected with her right away, and I was able to stop feeling unsure about trusting people. I had thought that there would never be a soulmate for me, but then I met mine. I checked myself to see if I still felt anything. There weren't many feelings left. Laura started this whole thing, and then, bam. Caramellarist sees the woman. I moved in with Belinda 4 weeks later, and I knew she was the one. Luckily, her kids welcomed me into the family with open arms. Today, I met Belinda. Her daughter asked me to walk her down the aisle, but that didn't stop the silly grin that's on my face almost all the time. Thanks for listening.